Hi, everyone. This is Talk Back. It is October 13th, just about 3 weeks away from an election. Wow, this has been an unbelievable year. And we're so lucky to have somebody today who's right in the heart of everything that's going on. I mean, today we're watching the Supreme Court hearings on the nomination, and our state attorney general in Connecticut, William Tong, is the embodiment of the American dream. Let me introduce him to you now. Hi, Attorney General. It's good to see you today.
Hey, Sheila. Great to see you. Welcome to the Attorney General's home prison during the pandemic.
Oh, that's right. You've got to be careful, of course.
Gotta be careful.
So I want to let everybody know that as part of your bio, you grew up in Hartford and your family had a Chinese restaurant, and you probably did a lot of your homework and your studying and everything else in the restaurant, helping them out. You became an attorney. You were in the state legislature before you became the attorney general. You were the head of the Judiciary Committee, the chair, and through that you did so much work in civil rights and domestic violence and gun legislation. And now here you are in the heat of one of the most, I think, exciting, important, crucial election periods of our time, where you have weighed in on every issue under the sun. So first, let's set the stage. What does the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut do, and how is that different than the Attorney General for the country?
So the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, first and foremost, protects and defends the state of Connecticut and individuals and families across our state. So my job and obligation first is to the people of this state. And that's where you see me stepping in to protect our individual liberties and freedoms and civil liberties, civil rights, but also, the rights of the state of Connecticut as a independent sovereign state. And I think that's where I want to start. People forget sometimes because for a lot of folks, civics was a long time ago in fourth, fifth, or sixth grade. But remember that the state of Connecticut is one of 50 sovereign states that we joined together in a federation known as the United States of America, to which we are bound by our consent. So we agreed to be part of this federation. And because it's a federation, the relationship between the states and the federal government is a relationship characterized as federalism, right? There's a relationship between a federal government of limited powers and the 50 states that give the federal government their power. So when I think, and when the people of our state think that the federal government has acted unlawfully or exceeded its authority in exercising the powers to which we have delegated to it, the states step forward. And as Attorney General, it's my job to step up to the federal government and stand up to the federal government and say, we don't agree with the action that you've taken. And we are going to fight to protect and defend the rights of the state of Connecticut and the people in our state. So that's a huge difference between me and the Attorney General of the United States, who's an appointed official who serves and represents the interests of the federal government.
Right. And sometimes the various state attorneys general get together on an issue that's of national importance to either sue or petition or in some way let the federal government know that they're not doing the right thing, right? We're going to talk about that.
We do it all the time.
Talk about that. So I want to let people know the breadth of the issues, as you mentioned. I looked at all of the press releases that your office has put out over the last couple of months, and you are interested in helping and protecting consumers' rights. You're interested in the election integrity, the Affordable Care Act that's under attack, the environmental issues. You've sued for the Arctic National Wildlife. You sued Exxon because of their deceit in climate change, the LGBTQ community, transgenders being able to adopt or be foster parents, civil rights issue, student loans. It goes on and on and on. You're protecting the consumer and all of the rights that we have in this state. Let's start with the Supreme Court, because what's going to happen on the big issues in our national life will depend on what happens there. And I know you talked about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Talk about her and the person that they're trying to put in her stead, this Amy Coney Barrett, who is right now answering questions in the Senate.
So this could not be more important to not just our immediate future, but the long-term future of our country, and to the continuing strength and efficacy of our public institutions, the rule of law, our constitutional system. Really, all of it hangs in the balance because of the damage that I believe the president has done to our Constitution and the violence he has done to our nation and its institutions. So what does that mean? That means that all roads lead to the Supreme Court. It means that everything from the Affordable Care Act, which you talked about, healthcare for millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions, millions of Americans who rely on their parents' plans, for example, if they're under 26. Millions of Americans who didn't have health insurance before now. And then, of course, the myriad of other issues, the census, the so-called travel ban, the rights of our family and friends in the LGBTQ plus community, childhood immigrants, otherwise known as dreamers. All of those issues, I've been fighting battles in the Supreme Court on all of those issues. And as we continue to fight those fights, all those roads lead to the Supreme Court. And I think it's clear that Justice Ginsburg had a expansive view of individual liberty and rights, which I share. And she was a strong defender of our civil rights as enshrined in the Bill of Rights and our federal Constitution. And she obviously was a trailblazer in terms of expanding those rights for women and people of color, and other people that are traditionally disadvantaged or underrepresented in public and private life. I don't know that Amy Coney Barrett shares that same conviction. It doesn't appear that that's where her priorities are. She indicated this morning that she's an originalist, which is a legal philosophy that the text of any law in the Constitution mean what they meant when they were enacted. And so she would look to what Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and others thought the Constitution should mean and what it meant then. And a lot of people, including me, don't believe that that's the right approach to reading our Constitution and our laws. And so, this is a very, very different direction for the court to go in under Justice Barrett in place of Justice Ginsburg. I'm not sure there's much we can do to stop it at this point because the Republican senators in Washington are hell-bent on making this nomination happen. I don't think they should. I think they should respect what they said, not long ago, that we shouldn't have a Supreme Court nominee and a vote on a Supreme Court nominee in an election year, and certainly not less than 30 days out. But it appears that they are not as good as their word.
No, they are. One thing we can say about the Republicans is that they've been on this march to pack the lower federal courts with their conservative philosophy and younger judges, some who are unqualified, and they've done that successfully. And now they are going to stack the Supreme Court and make it 6-3. And they have been much more diligent than the Democrats have been in making the Supreme Court an issue. And I blame some of this on the fact that the Democrats and people who care about the philosophy that you're talking about were not as good in their public relations and in the press and in the push to get the kind of court that we need. But be that as it may, maybe we will have a Democratic president. And let me talk about the election. Because I know as soon as that stuff about the post office came out, you joined other states. Tell me what's happening with election integrity. How can we be sure that you, as our attorney general, in combination with other attorney generals around the country, are going to make sure that our votes are going to be counted, it's going to be fair, and that President Trump is not going to be able to carry out the fraud and corruption with the vote that he is trying to do to undermine it?
He's trying, and I can tell you that from the front lines, he's trying. But let me be very clear. People watching this program, people across Connecticut, you should vote. You should vote confidently. If you're voting by absentee, you should vote as early as possible. Make sure you fill out your ballot correctly and properly. Your vote will be counted and it will count. And I am doing everything I can in connection with Governor, the Secretary of the State, local law enforcement to make sure that that this election is fair and transparent and safe and accurate, and that people are not intimidated at the polls, that people are not told misinformation. We're doing everything in our power to protect our right to vote in this state and to protect the integrity of our elections. Across the country, my Democratic AG colleagues and I have linked arms. We have set up a large operation to address election integrity, particularly in the swing states, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin. And we're ready. We're ready for, frankly, what happened in 2000 to be multiplied by 10, So we know that mistakes were made in 2000 in Bush v. Gore. We know that we can't repeat those mistakes. And so we have some of the strongest litigators, what we call in-court street fighters who really know their way around a courthouse and a lawsuit, and also some of the biggest brains in the legal universe who can be there to help us work through all these very difficult issues.
Well, a couple of issues. Do you think that the post office is really working with Trump to sabotage the vote, to make it difficult for the mail to get it there on time? Even in Connecticut, do you feel that?
I know that. I know that I believe that the Postmaster General is trying to carry out the president's directives and wishes in trying to slow down the delivery of mail and to impair the ability of the post office to be a strong partner in this election. I know that because I've seen these machines that they have dismantled, one of 700 of these high-speed postal sorting machines that can sort up to 35,000 pieces of mail an hour. One of those has been dismantled, chopped up into pieces and thrown out in the trash out back behind the Barbara Kennelly Postal Center in Hartford. So I've seen it with my own eyes.
Wow. And what about, do you think Trump could actually get an injunction through the courts to stop the counting of ballots? Is that some tactic that he might try?
I think that not only is it a tactic they could try, we expect them to try those tactics, particularly in the swing states.
But let me ask you, Attorney General, they've been successful, as we said, these past 4 years of getting these very conservative judges onto the federal courts. Are you concerned that you're going to get many of them who are not qualified, who are right-wing, and who are in Trump's pocket in many of the ways? Are you concerned about how they're going to respond?
We're concerned about all of that. And let me just say that that's why we had to put together this outside organization so that we could fight against any attempt to steal this election. And we have Democratic attorneys general and Democratic governors in the 4 states I mentioned: Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And so, yes, Sheila, all the things that you are highlighting are very real concerns, and we're doing everything we can to confront them.
Now, I know that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that, use the term conservative and liberal or progressive. I think the difference is whether you're personally conservative or not and have a different point of view. In the normal course, Democratic presidents have the right and prerogative to nominate judges that share their philosophy, and same with Republican presidents. And all things being equal, they have the right and prerogative to do that, and elections have consequences. However, I don't think that being a conservative means that you don't honor the rule of law. Right. I don't think being conservative means that you don't think the president should follow court orders. I don't think that being conservative means that you don't believe in the rights of all people and their rights specifically enshrined in the Constitution and in statute. I don't think that's being a conservative. I think that's not doing your job and not fulfilling your oath to the constitutional laws of the state of Connecticut and the federal government.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You make an excellent point. Conservative judges can be devoted to the rule of law the same way as liberal. I guess what I'm thinking about are more Trumpy, whatever you want to call it, people who somehow have been co-opted by the Trump philosophy, which you're right. It's in another category all by itself.
I think that's right. And I think we'll see. We'll see what we get with Amy Coney Barrett. We'll know on the plus side of things, Justice Gorsuch was critical in the Bostock case, guaranteeing employment discrimination, protection against employment discrimination for members of the LGBTQ plus community. It was Justice Roberts who sided with the more progressive members of the court on the DACA case and on the Affordable Care Act.
Right. Yeah.
So it is tricky business to prejudge what people will do. I happen to know some of the people appointed by President Trump to the Federal Court of Appeals. I believe that they would adhere to the rule of law, but let's see. It's hard to say.
Yeah. I want to get to the Affordable Care Act and Roe versus Wade, but before we do that, finishing up our discussion on the elections. So in Connecticut, you have to have your absentee ballot in by 8 p.m. on election day. There are other states that are passing laws that are enabling the absentees to come in later, a few days later. Isn't that better? Although I think we're able to count them a few days after the October 3rd. Is that right?
I think the legislature just passed a law that we're able to count them before now.
Right.
And we were unable to do that before. And now we can count them, I think, up to 4 days before. Let me just say that we are committed to making sure that every ballot that's cast, properly cast, is counted. And we expect there to be challenges. We expect people to make up nonsense legal claims, and we'll fight every single one.
Okay. One other comment. You hear in some of the states that have passed voter suppression laws, one of the things we saw yesterday in Georgia, people were said to have waited over 4 to 11 hours to vote, and they have early voting in Georgia. And I remember a few years ago, even in our own state of New Haven, in the city of New Haven, people waited so long online, some of them got perhaps discouraged and didn't vote. Cutting back on the number of polling places, on the number of these ballot boxes that are available to put your absentee ballots in, all of these are voter suppression. Can we be assured in Connecticut that in the big cities, people are not going to have to wait online for long, long hours?
I think we're going to do the best that we can. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. Those problems are real. They've occurred in the past. They occur under the best of circumstances. The best that we can do is make sure that our moderators, our election moderators, the Secretary of the State is doing the best she can to make sure they're trained, they're ready, they know who to call if they have a problem. And we're going to do everything we can in concert with our local elected registrars and election officials to ensure that we move this along as quickly as possible. But I won't sugarcoat it. The pandemic makes it very difficult.
Right. All right, let's go on. I want to talk about the Supreme Court and the two really important issues that everybody is very worried about and how things might happen if the Affordable Care Act is overturned and if Roe versus Wade is overturned. Let's take Roe versus Wade. If the right to the privacy rights and having control over your body to have an abortion if you choose in certain situations, if that's overturned, tell us what happens on the state level. If I'm a citizen of Connecticut or a citizen of Washington State or Nevada, what can my legislature, my attorney general, my governor do to give me the rights that the Supreme Court is taking away? How is that going to work?
Well, that's a different, that's actually not quite how it cuts. I think if they overturn Roe, what would happen is there would be no federally guaranteed right to an abortion. But that right and a woman's reproductive freedom and the right to choose is enshrined in Connecticut under state law and under.
That's what I meant, right?
So I don't want to say that I'm not worried about Connecticut, because of course I'm always worried about Connecticut, and one way for us to lose our rights is to be complacent. But as a member of the legislature, we made sure and continue to make sure that a woman's right to choose and her freedom over her own body is something that we will honor and respect here in Connecticut and protect and defend. I don't think, and I think Judge Barrett has indicated how she views this issue. I think it would be very difficult for there to be a full frontal overturning of Roe. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I'm saying that's probably not how this goes. What probably happens is they chip it away at this right more and more, to the extent that there are very few places where you can have a safe and legal abortion, if you need one, and where there are very few places where you can have safe and effective access to reproductive health care.
Right.
So there are already places in this country, Sheila, where you can't have an abortion. Let's be honest.
Well, because they're using the phrase, if it's an undue burden on the right, the legislation is no good, but they're allowing all that legislation, and they're saying, oh, it's not an undue burden to make sure that it's constructed of wood instead of whatever, right?
Missouri, Iowa, Texas, not easy.
Right.
Louisiana, impossible.
Right. So we're going to have people trying to come to Connecticut. But as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, the wealthy and connected people will always be able to get reproductive services. The poor, the underprivileged, the people in the rural areas will not. And that's the way it is.
Well, that's what frankly, if I can digress for a second, politically, that's what I object to the most from this president. And that is the people that get hurt most by his policies are the people that can least afford to pay their way out of it. And they're the people that can least afford to lose these services, the people that don't have access to healthcare. I mean, places like Planned Parenthood, for example, they don't just perform abortions. These are healthcare clinics for women who receive a full range of healthcare and reproductive healthcare from Planned Parenthood. Right. As the president dismantles all of these, the public charge rule, for example, that prejudices immigrants and people who need to access programs like Section 8 housing assistance or SNAP, otherwise known as food stamps for their children, or Medicaid. These are people that can least afford it. And by the way, there are a lot of people who live out your way: Colchester, Norwich, New London, Eastern Connecticut, Danielson, people who use these services, need these services in one form or another. And so it's not like just some other group of people.
Right.
All of us are families.
Right. Well, we see how people seem to vote against their own self-interest, which is
all the time
a political scientist's dilemma. They talk about that. And then, of course, the issue of the Affordable Care Act. In Connecticut, we've sort of codified that too, right? We have that in our legislature.
We have 10 essential benefits under the Affordable Care Act. I voted for that. We've codified it, thank God, here in Connecticut. But again, we're one state of 3 million people. And I will tell you, Sheila, I'm sure you haven't missed the irony that, prior to the pandemic, there's a lot of belly aching about Connecticut, and some people thought, what a rotten place to live. And now it's like one of the safest places on earth to live.
Right.
And frankly, the housing market in my part of the state down in Lower Fairfield County is blowing up like crazy. People can't move out to Connecticut fast enough from New York City. And so Connecticut now, in the fullness of time after this public health emergency started, people are starting to see, hey, it's not such a bad place.
Right. Well, we've had good leadership. Our governor has done a good job, despite the fact that we have not had a coherent national policy.
He's done a great job.
We've relied on our governor to do a good job for us, but we're not out of the woods yet. Things are not good, and people are predicting more outbreaks as we go into the later fall and winter. So we're still in the midst of that. And you talked about the irony of people voting against their own self-interest and the importance of Planned Parenthood. Why is it that the anti-abortion crowd are against family planning? Isn't that a way to prevent abortions, to have birth control and family planning? Does that make any sense?
I've been trying to figure it out for a long time. And I don't mean to be facetious. I think that there are deep cultural forces at work, and some people feel like they just need to be on one side or the other, which I think is contributing to the tearing apart of our communities, and I hope not the disintegration of our union. But it's very concerning, the polarization, how people seem to be at opposite ends, and this is really about who I am and what I believe and what tribe I'm a part of, as opposed to, what makes sense as a policy matter.
Yeah.
And I think it's all of us pray that we can get back to a substantive discussion about issues and, have a meaningful discussion about reproductive health care and how best to provide reproductive health care. And there is room to have a discussion about individual liberties, but not in a way that prejudices the rights of other people.
Right. I want to talk a little bit more about healthcare because I know how important the opioid addiction issue is to you. You want to talk about that and what you're doing on that score?
So one of the most deeply affecting things that I do every day, and it started when I became Attorney General, is to spend time with the families affected by the addiction epidemic and to work on these cases on their behalf. I'm one of a handful of AGs in this country that are part of the National Executive Committee of AGs fighting the opioid epidemic. And we're taking on really big companies, including Purdue Pharma, including the major drug distributors, Johnson & Johnson, but also many of the opioid manufacturers who are not household names, like Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals. And so just this past week, actually yesterday, we announced a major settlement under which Mallinckrodt will pay $1.6 billion to the states before going into bankruptcy in order to fund treatment, prevention, addiction science. We could always wish we could get even more money, and we will try to do that in the many other cases that we're engaged in. But this is a big win for families who are suffering from addiction and who've lost a loved one.
Sure. Let's talk about some of the consumer issues. Of course, this on top of our pandemic, on top of the civil unrest, the police brutality issues, we all of a sudden got this huge power failure, and you are embroiled in all of the issues involving Eversource and the other agencies that supply us. Tell us about how you are fighting for the consumer in all of this.
So we have a standing unit in the Office of the Attorney General that advocates on behalf of ratepayers. We're all ratepayers who pay the rates of our utilities. And we appear in every action, almost every action in front of our state's energy regulators. And in this case, that team has been fighting hard for reimbursement of storm-related losses, including food and medicine that people lose because of performance. We're a big part of the legislature's efforts in their latest special session to force the utilities to do a better job. And then finally, we're part of the investigation, helping to lead the investigation into the utilities' storm response, and also long-term, what they've done to their business and how ready and prepared they are to deal with major weather events as they become more and more frequent. So my job as Attorney General is to fight for all of you and citizens and families across the state to make sure that we push the utilities as hard as we can to really provide the public service they are given a monopoly franchise to provide, right? They're a sole source provider. And they have a lot of obligations if they're going to have a monopoly, and I don't think that they're meeting them.
Right. Okay. There are other consumer issues, student loans you worked on, airline protections, and things like that. Going after companies that are fraudulent and fleecing their customers. Talk about that for a moment.
So that, of course, is a big part of what an attorney general does every day: consumer protection. That's the biggest consumer protection case we ever took on was the big tobacco case. Another big one is my work against the generic drug industry for price fixing. So we're always fighting for people and individuals and families in Connecticut who are abused by corporate wrongdoers and anybody who tries to take advantage of their neighbors in their community. The most basic way we do it, and there's really been so much work in this area after the public health emergency started, is in protecting individual residents from price gouging. And so we heard early on that people were seeing in stores and online, a box of masks for $500, a couple bottles of hand sanitizer for $30. And, we looked at every single complaint, took them all very seriously, ran down every complaint, and where we could and we were able, we helped people stop price gouging that they see in their communities, recoup money that may have been stolen from them because of price gouging or unfair practices. We see that a lot in the travel space. People have had their travel plans canceled, flights, cruises, big school trips, for example. That's a big area in which we've been active in trying to get people their money back. We can't solve every problem, but in many cases, we've been able to get people their money back, and we've saved people in Connecticut thousands and thousands of dollars, and well more than $1 million here in Connecticut in all of our work.
Yeah. So I know another issue that's really important to you. You are the first Asian American to have a statewide office in Connecticut, the first Asian American Attorney General in Connecticut. So I know when the Trump administration came in and they started their travel bans, I know that you were outraged. And tell us what you did about that and connect that with the issue of immigration and the issue of the census, because that's so important now in determining how many congressmen we have and what services we get.
Well, I think everybody knows the difference, or at least people who really think about these issues. We know the difference between a real national security priority and when the president is just catering to a racist or hateful fringe that forms the base of his support. And I to be fair, I think that presidents and the federal government get the benefit of the doubt on law enforcement efforts they must take to keep us safe, and national security initiatives they must take to keep us safe. But when you just ban people without a good reason from certain countries from traveling into this country, as was the case under the Muslim ban, because you don't like their religion or you don't know how they look, and there's no actionable reason to exclude those people, or when you refer to the coronavirus as the China virus and call it the Kung flu and blame me and my family and millions of Asian Pacific Americans across the country for a virus we did not create. That doesn't just sow seeds of division and hate. That puts people at risk. People get beat up, they get harassed, they get intimidated, sometimes they get killed. And it's deeply upsetting to see the President of the United States incite violence against other people. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised, given that the president refused to condemn white supremacists. I shouldn't be surprised that he's speaking to them, with his anti-immigrant fervor and his war on American immigrants, and the way that he attacks not just Asian Pacific Americans, but many different communities of color, particularly immigrant communities. It's deeply upsetting and a violation of his oath of office to keep all of us safe.
Well, I wanted to ask about the census, but you just reminded me of an issue. We know that the FBI and the federal agencies are saying that the greatest majority of domestic terrorism is from the white supremacist groups, not the left wing. They make a smaller percentage. In Connecticut, do we have any serious concerns about white supremacist groups?
Yes, I think we have serious concerns about them everywhere. And the FBI has indicated that the rise of hate, particularly by those groups, is the top or one of the top two domestic national security and public safety issues we face. So this is not a small issue that affects only one small swath of the population. This is a big deal for federal law enforcement and a big deal for all of us. And adding fuel to the fire by hateful and divisive rhetoric and also policies that encourage people to hate each other or discriminate against each other, that only fuels this hatred and makes America less safe.
What is your comment on what happened to the governor of Michigan, the plot that they uncovered to kidnap her, probably do violence to her? Talk about that. Are other attorneys general and governors around the country doing anything to prevent things like that from happening?
Yeah, so you reap what you sow on this one, honestly. Again, the divisive rhetoric and pitting people against each other and chanting "lock her up" with respect to Secretary Clinton, or investigating the investigators. That's a new thing that we never did in this country. Now the president is demanding that the Department of Justice investigate other law enforcement, right, to delegitimize them and to serve as political interests. Again, referring to Hispanic Americans and Latinx Americans as bad hombres, or trying to cast them as stealing our jobs and public services. That all of this, all these racist tropes and stereotypes that, frankly, Sheila, sometimes you forget because you live in a safe and welcoming community, and seems like we've gotten beyond all of that. But then you get a big bucket of cold water and ice that you haven't got beyond that.
Yeah.
In terms of anti-Semitism, I never thought as Attorney General that I would have to attend a vigil right in West Hartford after the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, and that we would be dealing with hateful attacks on synagogues here in Connecticut, that would be something that my children would see happen in their lifetime. Because sometimes it's tempting to live in a place, when you live in a place like Connecticut, to think that we've moved beyond all of that.
Right. I did want to get back to, I mentioned the census a few times, the importance of making sure we count everybody, and how important it is that they try to put the word citizen in there. You don't have to be a citizen. You have to be residing and you have to count that. And people can't be afraid if they're immigrants or undocumented. It can't be used against them. Just talk about that briefly, because the census is getting ready to be finished, and it's very important.
The Constitution says count every person, and it is a constitutionally mandated process under our federal Constitution. What does that mean? That means it's supposed to and has to happen as commanded by our Constitution. And it requires that we count every person, not every citizen, not every landholder, not only persons of a particular gender or racial or ethnic or religious background. It means everybody. And what the president has done, trying to add a citizenship question, where you determine whether somebody is a citizen or not, is to willfully undercount or to suppress people's willingness to respond. So even if you say, well, I'm not trying to undercount, I just want to know how many citizens are out there. If you're not a citizen, you may think, well, there's something wrong with me, or they're going to use this answer to come after me, so I'm not going to fill it out. And if you willfully undercount or willfully force the undercounting, that prejudices Connecticut, because if we undercount, there's so many ways in which we're impacted, right? Members of Congress is based on the census, numbers of members of Congress. Federal aid for disaster relief based on the federal census. Healthcare, social services, all of these food stamps, food availability, all of these issues are impacted by the census numbers. And if we don't have accurate census numbers, the only people that lose are all of us who live in Connecticut.
Right. Very, very important. Thank you for that. Fine. Let's just, as a last category, although there's so many more, talk about in the environment. You're working hard for environmental causes. Talk about that. Something that's not talked enough about, I think, in the presidential election.
So two things. One is I announced about a month ago that I've sued ExxonMobil. I sued ExxonMobil because I believe they knew about climate change and climate science as far back as the 1950s. And they could have done the right thing and educated the public, and we could have taken action to confront climate change. But instead, they engaged in a campaign to deceive us and convince us that climate change isn't real, which we know that it is. And so climate, in terms of the climate, ExxonMobil knew, and they lied to us. And that's why I've sued ExxonMobil. Related to that is all of our work in trying to protect clean air and clean water. What people don't realize is that Connecticut's air and water isn't as clean as it should be. And particularly our air should be much cleaner than it is. And part of that is because Connecticut lives at the end of America's tailpipe. When states upwind of us pollute Ohio, Pennsylvania, elsewhere, and they send emissions into the air, those emissions blow downwind into Connecticut. And that's just how the weather and the jet stream and all of that works. And that's why it's so important. We have filed countless suits and objections in front of our federal regulators to try to stop them from dismantling the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. But that's another program that the president is engaged in that hurts Connecticut directly, in which I have to fight.
Right. He's probably dismantled almost every environmental regulation that the Obama administration put into effect, right? Pretty much. That's his goal.
And it won't be as easy as snapping a finger and they all go back either.
Right, right. So I guess your words on the election and the fact that you're on it, you've got the attorneys ready, the election lawyers ready, the information that you need. Can you feel hopeful that the election will work out, it will be fair, and it will come out okay? I need your reassurance.
I believe in the beauty and the promise of our country. And I believe that because I have the opportunity to speak to you today as your Attorney General. And I know that against tremendous odds, my family and families like ours have been able to make a life for themselves and to succeed in this country, and that is what makes America great. And I think that truth endures, and I think we will overcome all of this. I believe that Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States, and I will do everything I can to make sure that happens.
Okay. I think that's a great final note, but I'll give you a chance if you have anything else that's on your mind that you want to add before we close.
Vote, and vote.
Vote. Absolutely. And tomorrow we're going to have Denise Merrill on at 1:00 to talk about vote. Thank you so much, Attorney General William Tong. You gave us so much information, and I'm glad everybody in Connecticut now knows you're in our corner fighting for us and fighting for a fair and safe election.
Can't wait to do this in person.
All right. We'll see you next time. Hopefully, yes, in person. Take care. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone,
Sheila.
for Talk
Bye.
Back. Thank you. Bye.